The Lord of the Rings, without doubt some of the greatest films ever made, at least if you ask me. I've watched them countless times and looked for every detail imaginable. But while they are great films, they are not without flaws. Especially if we look at it from the perspective of adapting the books and staying true to Tolkien's lore. I must admit that this top 10 list ended up being a top 11. There are simply too many things to cover. So here are my top 11 worst changes Peter Jackson made to The Lord of the Rings. Number 11. The Mouth of Sauron and Frodo's fate at the Black Gate. We start out with me cheating a little, as this is technically 2 in 1. If you've ever watched the extended edition of The Return of the King, you know there's a scene with the Mouth of Sauron outside the Black Gate. There are 2 issues with this, so let's address the easy one first. I don't think Aragorn should have killed the Mouth of Sauron. First of all, that doesn't happen in the book. Secondly, it feels a bit out of character for Aragorn. And thirdly, and most importantly, it's not very kingly. Imagine a soon-to-be king cutting off the head of diplomats. Not the best way to start your reign. I even made a meme about it, because I think it's such a bad change. But what's the other one, you might wonder? Perhaps you can guess it from the title, where Frodo's fate is also mentioned. So what do I mean by that? It's no secret that the films have a lot of fake deaths for Frodo. So at this point, we won't even believe the Mouth of Sauron when he claims Frodo is dead. And that's really my issue with this scene. It has lost the weight it has in the books. We already know Frodo isn't dead, so the scene makes so much more sense in the book. At this point in the books, we only know he's captured and brought to the Tower of Cirith Ungol. So the Mouth's words have a lot more weight to them in the books. And readers might actually believe him. I don't think anyone in the films actually believed him. I'm not really sure if that's the reason it was cut from the theatrical version, but the scene falls kind of flat to me because of it. Number 10. The Lords of Gondor and the Oathbreakers. Gondor, my favorite faction in all of Middle-earth, and lore-wise, also the strongest kingdom of men during the War of the Ring. Yet in the films, they are portrayed as weak and indecisive, and this is further emphasized during the Siege of Gondor and the Battle of Pelennor Fields. Here's the Rohirrim and Oathbreakers that save the day, unlike the books where Aragorn arrives with the Lords of Gondor. So first off, I think the Oathbreakers are simply too overpowered in the films, and it kinda ends the battle immediately, which is a shame in my opinion. As soon as they arrive, it's clear who is going to win. I don't think the Oathbreakers should have been there, and instead they should have went with the book version where the Lords of Gondor come to the rescue along with Aragorn and the Great Company. It would have made for a more interesting battle where more is at stake, and it would have prevented the fair question: why not use the Oathbreakers against the forces of Mordor? Going with the book version would not only make Gondor look stronger, but we would also get to see a tiny glimpse of how vast a kingdom it actually is, and how many different people live in the kingdom. I really don't see the reason for this change, and when you think about it, it just sort of gets worse. Would you even be able to sail a ship with only 3 men? And why are the Oathbreakers on board the ship if they fly around anyway? I would have preferred to see Imrahil, Angbor, Forlong, and the other Lords of Gondor in action. Or Beregond at least. I know many other fans share the same opinion when it comes to this, but let me know in the comments what you think. Number 9. Saruman's ending. If you have never watched the extended edition of The Return of the King, you might be wondering what actually happened to that evil wizard, Saruman. You see, we only get to see Grima stabbing him in the extended cut, which is a major issue for me. While it does have aspects from the lore, it of course removes the whole scouring of the Shire. While that would have been great to see, it's very understandable why it was cut out, especially if we take a deep dive into how stories and films are normally structured. However, I do think it's one of the weakest points in the entire trilogy. Not only is Saruman the main villain in the Two Towers, but he is already introduced in the Fellowship of the Ring. It feels so odd. He is totally ignored and forgotten from the start of The Return of the King, and then never really mentioned again. It just doesn't feel right he only appears in the extended edition. One of the issues with this is also that he is one of the only villains we get to understand a bit better, which is natural as he has more dialogue and screen time compared to Sauron. So I really think it should have been handled differently, or that the scene from the extended edition shouldn't have been cut. Christopher Lee was also very surprised when he watched The Return of the King for the first time, and it actually resulted in him and Peter Jackson not talking for years. at least not until the production of the Hobbit trilogy. I'm glad they could get past it, but I truly understand Christopher Lee's viewpoint. Number 8. Removing the 17 years and the aging of Bilbo. Perhaps you don't know this, but 17 years actually pass from Bilbo's farewell party to Frodo leaving the Shire with the ring. It's not something you notice in the films, and there's a good reason for this. The 17 years have been removed altogether. While this makes a lot of sense movie-wise, it does make a mess with the timeline we know from the lore. So buckle up, it's getting nerdy, and I'll explain why exactly it's causing issues. First of all, there's actually quite an odd mistake in the extended cut. Here Bilbo says it's the year 3000 of the Third Age, but lore-wise it's the year after he celebrates his birthday. So by mistake it's actually 18 years they cut, and not 17. However, we know Bilbo and Frodo celebrate their birthday the 22nd of September, and later Gandalf tells Frodo it's the 24th of October, as Frodo wakes up in Rivendell. So for all of this movie stuff to work, Gandalf needs to fast travel from the Shire to Gondor, find and read the Scroll of Isildur, ride back to the Shire, then to Isengard, escape imprisonment quickly, and then fly on Gwaihir all the way to Rivendell. All of that in 1 month and 2 days. On top of that mess, we are led to believe that in exactly that time, Bilbo went from this to this. I don't know about you, but that seems a bit extreme. And it also seems to highlight that they weren't actually sure if they should cut the 17 years or not. So I would really have preferred if they added a line saying 17 years later or something like that. Or at least a year, so things work out better. I guess Frodo should have aged as well then, but yeah, maybe that's just me. Let me know what you think in the comments. Number 7. Denethor changed. If there's one character from the films fans can agree to hate on, it's Denethor. Especially his sinister way of eating tomatoes. What is that? However, movie Denethor is very different from his book counterpart. In the book, the Palantir of Minas Tirith plays a big role in his character change, his despair, and in the end his suicide. All something that truly highlights the powers of Sauron and how he can manipulate the minds of others. So not only is it tragic, we get this depraved version of Denethor, but it also takes away something from Sauron, the most important villain in the trilogy. Perhaps it would have been too dark for him to commit suicide, I'm not really sure. Oh, and that long run while he's on fire? Why? Just why? Very unrealistic and silly in my opinion. Number 6. Éomer's role. Éomer is a fan favourite among book readers, and for good reason. And while Karl Urban does a phenomenal job, his character's role has greatly been reduced. First of all, the friendship between him and Aragorn, or him and Gimli, is pretty much just removed, at least in my opinion. It may not be that important in the films, but lore-wise, it's actually super important, as Gimli later founds the colony of the Glittering Caves in Rohan, and Éomer becomes the king of Rohan and a very close friend and ally of Aragorn. On top of that, the whole banishment plot in the films is added instead of Éomer being imprisoned in Edoras after the Uruks had been slain. He is also taken out of the Battle of Helm's Deep, well until the very end at least. And all of these changes means he gets way less screen time and doesn't develop the same strong bonds with Aragorn and Gimli as in the books. It's quite sad, as I really like Éomer, and I also think Karl Urban could have pulled off a fantastic book Éomer. Number 5. Merry and Pippin pops into the story. Are Sam, Frodo, Pippin and Merry actually friends? If you read the books, the answer is obviously yes. But that's not very clear in the beginning of the films. In fact, they just sort of pop into the story and randomly follows Frodo to Bree. Of course, in the book, there's the whole Crickhollow plan Frodo comes up with, which isn't part of the films either. Pippin travels with Frodo and Sam from the start at Back End, and they later meet up with Merry at the Buckleberry Ferry, while being hunted by the Nazgul and aided by Farmer Maggot. And it's first much later, they actively take a choice to follow Frodo into the unknown. Something Fatty Bolger doesn't, by the way. So I really think this change reduces the friendship between them, though it gets better as they make it to Bree. I get why they had to make a change, now that they cut out Tom Bombadil, Buckland, and reduced Farmer Maggot to an angry farmer. Still in the books, the characters take a very active choice of following their friend, while movie Merry and Pippin seems more forced into it. Number 4. Elves at Helm's Deep. You have probably heard this a million times, but hopefully I can add something new to it. Yes, the Elves of Lothlorien and Haldir did not fight at the Battle of Hornburg. While it is nice to see them fighting and further developing Haldir's character, it's a change I don't really appreciate. For starters, Haldir is killed off while he doesn't die in the book, at least not from what we know. And if he dies, it would likely have been during one of the attacks on Lorien, and certainly not at Helm's Deep. But my main issue with this has to do with the logic and geography. If we take a look at the map, it should be obvious to anyone that the distance between Lorien and Helm's Deep is far greater than between Isengard and Helm's Deep. So for this to make logical sense, the elves would have to march towards Helm's Deep days before the Uruk-hai army marched out. In fact, it might have been before Edoras was even evacuated in the films. Another thing I really dislike, by the way, but it didn't make it to the list. Now let's go with this logic and pretend the elves have foreseen an attack on Rohan and simply marched to help wherever needed. How come they didn't send word and warn Rohan, or that they at least told them that they were on their way? It simply doesn't make sense in my head. Also, how can every single elf die during this battle? What a coincidence. Not to mention, it's quite baffling, given how great warriors and archers they appear to be. Yeah, as you can hear, I really disapprove this change, and it just feels unnecessary. I guess Peter Jackson simply loved his elf fights too much. It is cool, don't get me wrong, and at least it shows the elves being willing to fight. Number 3. Faramir's character changed. Hopefully this doesn't come as a surprise to anyone that have actually read the books. First of all, the movie Faramir is almost the exact opposite of the book version. In some ways, he is a redeemed Boromir, while in the book, he rejects the ring pretty early on. And while they do use his dialogue later in The Return of the King, it falls kind of flat, as we've already seen how the ring influenced him in the Two Towers. Now he just looks like a liar. On top of that, we have the brutal treatment of Gollum that also makes him a bit more shady than necessary. And don't get me started on the whole detour to Osgiliath. Sure, nice to see the ruined city, but also kind of pointless in my opinion. The worst part about these scenes is the dialogue where Faramir decides to let Frodo go. It sounds like Faramir is about to face a death penalty for treason, but then it's never brought up again. To this day, I still got no idea what the point of this dialogue was. It seems like meaningless tension. If we take a look at his character in The Return of the King, he is yet again reduced, which also includes a cavalry charge into a hail of arrows. A great way to get his men killed, and again not something I'd expect from his book counterpart. I feel his story with Éowyn is also a bit forced, and after that it just ends. Except that short appearance at the coronation of Aragorn. I get that they don't want to spend too much time on the character near the end, but he sure is the character Peter Jackson and the team budget the most. I think the sad part about all of this is that Tolkien said the following in one of his letters. As far as any character is like me, it is Faramir. Number 2. Frodo telling Sam to go back. When you create a film, you want drama and tension, but it can also go horribly wrong, as we see in the scenes on the stairs to Shelob's lair. It feels out of character that Gollum can manipulate Frodo to convince him that Sam wants the ring. We already know that Frodo doesn't trust Gollum. He even says so in the Two Towers. I get what Peter Jackson was aiming for. Now the ring is stronger, and the friendship starts to crack as the ring starts to work on Frodo as well as Gollum. But I still think it was pulled off kinda bad. The worst part is without doubt Sam finding the limbus bread on the stairs. I mean, what is he meant to realize here? Oh, so I didn't eat the bread after all. Surely he already knows. I think it would have been more powerful if he had followed regardless out of friendship. He knew Gollum was up to something and that Frodo wasn't safe. I think it's out of character and is a really unnecessary change that just makes the story worse. Before we get to number 1, I have some honorable mentions. To be honest, there are too many to mention them all, so instead I've listed them here. Let me know if you want another video where I cover some of these. Number 1. Arwen's fate being tied to the ring. While I appreciate Arwen having a bigger role in the story, I really don't like how it's pulled off in several cases. The worst one, however, is without doubt when Elrond arrives at Dunharrow and says Arwen's fate is now tied to the One Ring. It doesn't make any sort of sense. First of all, how? Secondly, why? It just opens up for a ton of questions we never get an answer for. It's really weird and vague, and as a viewer, you're starting to wonder if it's a link to her being a half-elf or something else. Yet another thing I feel they didn't explain well in the films. It wouldn't surprise me if people think all elves have the same choice. Now, why would they add this to the films? Clearly to increase the stakes and put pressure on Aragorn. Now he is even more desperate to defeat Sauron and destroy the ring. Even so desperate to take the paths of the dead. So again, we have a very similar situation like with Merry and Pippin, where characters are sort of pushed into a certain direction. While in the books, the characters make more choices themselves. Here Aragorn is reminded of the prophecy of Malbeth and chooses to take the path of the dead. It's his destiny. While in the films, it feels a bit random. Oh yeah, by the way, there's a ghost army in the mountains behind you. Perhaps they would be willing to fight for you. I don't know. It's not perfect, but to be honest, I still love the films. They are great and the best films I know of. It's what got me introduced into Tolkien and Middle-earth, and that love has only grown bigger over the years. So despite all these changes, I still highly recommend the films and think everyone should watch them at least once in their life. Anyway, that's all from me. As always, thanks to all the members and patrons of the channel. I wouldn't be able to make these videos without your support. So thank you. And thanks to all of you for watching for this long. Feel free to watch one of these videos next. Farewell till next time.